And now I'd like to open the meeting to the sharing of testimonies of healing through Christian Science. Jeremy.
Tonight I am grateful for all that I am learning here about Christian Science. I used to worry all the time about everything. When I was writing this, I started to list all the things I worried about, but I know we don't have that kind of time. Since coming here and working with a practitioner, however, I've been able to put away all of that worry. I know that God took me away from that wreckage of my old life, and every little and big thing that has happened in the past 2.5 years works to prove how much God cares for me and for us all. I was driving the other day, and I was thinking about the concept of giving the past to God, and I realized that meant none of us have a history apart from God. Whatever nonsense we have thought or gone through, God will nullify and leave us with only goodness. That's quite a wonderful promise, and all it requires is that I keep my focus on God. I've already gone through a lot of time where I focused on everything else, and I've seen where that led, and it was nowhere good. So I'm very happy to learn how to do this right here. I'm so grateful for all the lessons, daily practitioner support, and all that this church offers. Thank you.
Thank you. Lil.
This winter's snow shoveling reminded me of a healing I had a couple of years ago. I had had a small growth on one shoulder for quite a while. Having done a lot of shoveling, my coat rubbed on it a lot, and it got very enlarged. At first I was concerned, but then clung to the thought that I cannot be punished for doing good. It started to harden. In a couple of days, it was gone. It fell off. I know this was God's work, His blessed work, and I thanked Him so much. And thank you for the readings.
Thank you. Linda from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the beautiful service tonight. I am grateful for all I am learning that is helping me be the person God intended me to be. I am truly discovering how to clean up my side of the street, as they say. For me, this means I am working on letting go of a victim mentality, not blaming others, changing negative thinking, and a new self-awareness is growing. I'm replacing human will with prayer, learning to practice humility, honesty, gratitude, unselfishness, patience, and be responsible for my actions, and actively making changes with God. Before Plainfield, when in search for support and release from mental pain, I found a 12-step program that introduced me to these concepts, of which I was grateful for at the time. But for me, a deeper, consistent change took place from the loving patience of a dedicated practitioner here and of the supportive members and the true science that is taught and lived here. Feeling God and His love, trusting His care, and living in according to His laws and principles have been breaking down many walls. To walk with God and live a life of integrity is a priceless gift. I am just beginning, and I'm very grateful for all who have paved the way, for Mrs. Mary Baker Eddy, for Jesus, and other independent thinkers and biblical teachers. Thank you, Plainfield. Good evening.
Thank you. Chardell from Pennsylvania, go ahead.
Good evening. Tonight I would like to express my gratitude for a demonstration about place and a good idea. My friend and I had been planning for a visit to Plainfield for several weeks to attend a Saturday Bible study, but it looked like there were some mechanical issues that might prevent us from getting to Plainfield. We both worked independently with a practitioner and did not discuss our individual prayers. I worked on patience, not pushing my personal agenda, listening to and depending on God's plan, and aging. God's ideas don't deteriorate. The decision wasn't reached until after 8 p.m. on Friday night to go, and so we did. It was a wonderful trip, and by day's end, Benjamin was the last person we saw as we were pulling away to return home. He was changing words on the message board that is placed in front of the church. I couldn't remember the exact wording, so Jeremy helped me by sending a photograph of the sign. It reads, "The child of God is never alone," and so it was and is forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Day from Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm grateful for what I'm learning in this church about the importance of becoming familiar with good and listening to God. I've experienced often that when I'm going to God for the answer to something, and I feel I've received the answer, or that I'm being led in the right direction, some suggestion will come to turn me around, confuse me, or make me doubt my trust in Him. Learning to trust God more and practicing this daily with even the smallest things helps me to stand more firm when resisting the temptation to turn away from Him. I've noticed that in my practice of going to God first for answers, I no longer have the urgent tendency to seek others' opinions to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I find it much more helpful to continue asking God for His guidance in all that I do. And this also helps me to remember that any opinion I have to offer cannot interfere with what God is telling someone else, because He speaks to each of us directly. I'm grateful for my practitioner here, who has helped me by teaching me to be confident in turning and listening to God alone, while encouraging me to think freely. I'm so grateful to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Luann from New York, go ahead.
Thank you, Bruce. Recently, while driving in the car, I noticed myself smiling. It kind of intrigued me because it is something I'm not accustomed to doing. Most of the time, I'm in deep thought about all the work I need to do or the obligations I have. But at that moment, I was not thinking about myself. I was thinking about God. I felt truly happy and at peace. I could not really explain what I felt, but I knew God was with me. It felt like a weight had been taken off of me. I noticed the deep frown lines on my forehead had faded, and my face felt kinder. I'm grateful for Christian Science and the work my practitioner has done for me to free me from my negative thinking that was keeping me from seeing the truth. Her continual prayers and treatments applied to my erroneous claims have shown me that I don't have to accept anything but what God has given me. I'm learning to give everything to God, and I've never felt safer and more at peace. I am so grateful to be a member of the Plainfield Church Independent because I truly believe God has led me here to show me and to help me live the life He has intended me to live. I feel so indebted to God for all the blessings I have been given. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary.
I'm so grateful to be learning in this church to recognize how God takes care of everything, down to the littlest detail in our lives, and learn to see it and appreciate it and give gratitude for it. I had an experience recently that I'd like to share. I work in a town nearby where it's often hard to find a parking spot. And I have a permit to park in a garage, but it always fills up, and it's often fills up, around 9:30 or so, and so I usually try to get there before then. But few days ago, a couple weeks ago, I felt inspired to stay home longer in the morning. There was work that needed to be done for church, and I just felt strongly that it was the right thing for me to do. So I did it, and felt good about it. And as a result, left much later for work than I usually do. And on the way, I thought, well, I wonder where I'm going to park. But I wasn't worried. I trusted God to take care of me one way or another. And it was uncanny, because I thought, well, I'll try the garage, even though I know it's full. And I went in, and right there on the first floor was one empty spot. Well, what I felt at the time was wonderful, because I just felt this warm surge of God's love and care for me. And I just pulled in, and I just stopped and spent a few moments thanking Him for taking care of me. And it was like a voice was saying, see, I do care for you. And thank you for doing what you did this morning. This is not the first time that this kind of thing has happened. And I'm so grateful to know that it's not coincidence, it's not luck, it's not any of those things. It's God taking care of us when we obey Him and do what He wants us to do. So I'm so grateful for what I've been learning about Christian Science in this church. So grateful to Mary Baker Eddy and for Carpenter for writing that wonderful biography about her, how she demonstrated every detail of her life and encouraged her students to go to God for every detail of their life. It's made all the difference in my life. I'm so grateful to be here.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the reader. Tonight, the reading was wonderful. Very instructive too. Recently, I was having this thought with myself about what gratitude actually means to me. Is it just thanking God all the time for how wonderful He is to me? What a wonderful thing He has done to me or for me. What a wonderful gift or this that He has given me. But this thought came to me that it's not even close to being grateful. And the thought also told me that my gratitude has to include what I have done for somebody else. In fact, that's the biggest gratitude to God. Living it with everyone. And I started to ask God to provide me the opportunity to do that, because if I'm grateful, I must be able to have impact in people's life on a daily basis. And the opportunity has never stopped coming. And it makes me a better person, a happier person every day. I felt like every day is a life worthwhile. It's just a wonderful, wonderful growth recently that I've had. Being able to touch other people's life in many ways, especially strangers that I don't even know. Being able to have the opportunity, because since I had that prayer, the opportunity had been there. The most recent one was last week when we had the big storm. It was the biggest I've witnessed myself. And after helping myself in my house, shoveling myself out, and I decided to take a walk to the grocery store. I don't want to drive. The grocery store was like half a block from my house. But before I get there, I was able to help 3 drivers. I don't even know where the energy came from. I was asking myself, people who got stuck in the snow. And I was the only one available for them, helping them out of the snow. But God gave me the strength to do so because I asked for it. And I came home, I was the same person as I was before I left my house. He didn't take anything from me, but I was full of energy. I'm so grateful to God for this idea that came to me. Frankly, it has made me a better person and a more happier person. Thank you.
Thank you. Fairley from Maryland, go ahead.
Thank you. I am very grateful for the invaluable teaching of true Christian Science that goes on at Plainfield with the Bible studies and round tables and with my ever-available practitioner. Also, the input of questions for the Bible study from fellow members, as well as their testimonies of healing. After being at Plainfield now about 3 years, among other healings that I've had, I have recently recognized that a habit of anxiety that had been with me for a number of years has gradually been going away. At some point in the years leading up to finding Plainfield, I had begun to check and recheck everything overly much so that family members occasionally noticed it. I would check the stove to be sure it was off over and over again. When I went in a closet and pulled the chain to turn on a light overhead, after I closed the door, I would open it again just to make sure the light was out. The same with locking my car. This was true about lots of small things. But in this past year, I have recognized this habit as an anxiety that I do not need to have. I have prayed to God to free me of anxiety. Focusing on this habit began some months back when I heard a testimony by a fellow member about having a tendency of racing for the telephone when it rang and quitting that. I began to practice that first because I always raced for the phone. Then it moved on to the other small anxious behaviors which I am becoming free of now. For this advancement, I am grateful to God, to Mrs. Eddy, my practitioner, and all at Plainfield. And thank you very much for the readings and the beautiful service.
Thank you. Craig.
Thank you for those beautiful readings. Be not deceived. And it is so helpful because I remember coming here and it was told when I got here that Christian Science is for everyone. It's common sense. And I became an usher and I loved doing it. Church that I grew up in, I was an usher as a junior usher, I guess. And then I was so appreciated being asked to do that here. Well, it is so important in the work that we do. I begin to understand that in doing it, you're planting the seed, and don't be discouraged, but just keep planting seeds. I had help from a practitioner today over discouragement. It was a moment mourning over something, but we're planting seeds, and there's so many people that have had wonderful experiences. I realized even more, but they don't quite know where to go from there. They need to find our church, and they will. I was on a train to Newark just the other day, Tuesday, and this fellow there, he was just a friendly fellow, and I suppose I appeared to be. So he started talking to me, and I felt after hearing him talk a little bit that I just needed to let them know about our church. So I reached in my pocket and I found the church's calling card, business card, and I gave it to him. And it was just the right thing. It was planting the seed. And he told me, he says, he shouldn't be here because he was about to die or he needed a liver. And he was, and all of a sudden, he was way down the list. And all of a sudden, he was way up at the top of the list. And he gave him one. He's been healthy for so long. But he said that was God doing it. It was like God knew that I needed something, and he found a way to me to get it. And I gave him our card, and I said, yeah, and there is find out more. And the planting the seed is great. And along with that, be not deceived. That once you've planted the seed, that you take responsibility to God. Responsibility is God's, and he'll take care of that. And to just go on to the next thing and plant some more seeds and shine some brighter lights. Thank God for this church. It helps getting the person out of the way of things.
Thank you. Carol.
I had a close vision of a helicopter mom recently. And these are women who hover over their children. They direct every bit of their lives. And they actually are smothering the child. And that made me so grateful for what I learned in this church. When our church became independent, many of us had kids that were still in school, and we didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to spend with them because we were all busy at church, and it was needed. It was very needed. And I remember talking to a practitioner, to Mrs. Evans, about it, and she said to me, when you do God's work, he takes care of yours. And I thought, okay. But I continued because I love God, I love Christian Science, and I believed what the church was doing. And all of us got the same advice, I'm sure. And so we just kept working, and all of us have kids that are grown now and that are upstanding citizens. They're mature, they're fine. We couldn't have raised them any better than God did. As Mrs. Evans told us, we needed to trust our children to God. And we did. And God took care of them. He raised them for us, and they turned out wonderfully. I couldn't be more grateful to God for remembering that and seeing the opposite working today or the other day. And I just am so very grateful for Christian Science and grateful for the way of life that it has given us. And thank you for those readings tonight. They were beautiful.
Thank you. Florence from Georgia, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you for the readings tonight about remaining undeceived, because I used to get deceived all the time and for long periods too. The resources in this church has taught me a lot. In Eustace's book, on page 252, he says that no case can be correctly handled until it is seen as pure hypnotic suggestion. This concept was very difficult for me for some time, but then I learned that in the human mind can never realize that a lie is unreal. That I have come to understand that it meant that as long as I was fearful, worried, anxious, and all that, I couldn't see the unreality of any claim. In other words, I was accepting the material picture and often entertaining thoughts of resentment, revenge, anger, irritation. And as long as I remained in that kind of thinking, I could never see past an error. I could never see that it's unreal. What was necessary, I learned, was to turn to God And I found myself, I would just pray, Father, help me to see the unreality of what seems to be happening. And with that, I also started to think rightly, to uplift my thinking. Instead of the negative, I would dwell on thoughts of kindness, compassion, tenderness, honesty, sincerity, forgiveness. And I found that that kind of thinking really brought my thoughts in line with God. I could hear his messages, which often included the exact truth that counteracted whatever was presenting. I'm very grateful for this because I used to stay tortured, just exhausted, trying with declarations that really didn't get to anything because I was still in the human mind. And so I'm so grateful for all those resources here that consistently remind us as to how to think, and also remind us that we turn to God first because he is the source of all our help, and a free help at that, always available for all mankind. Thank you very much for the service and for all the testimonies given.
Thank you. This is Bruce. I'm very thankful for an article that's on our carousel. It's called Sight, and it's really a spectacular article. The metaphysics in that article are just superb. But for me, the thing that I was thankful for is it included a statement from Science and Health that says, metaphysics resolves things into thoughts. And I can remember a time when I thought of things as being on one side of existence and God and spirit as being on the other side, but that was definitely a wrong approach because it led me to believe that when I had to deal with things, it was more of an inconvenience and an aggravating one at that, maybe. But I realized that recently it became apparent that I needed some new shoes. And I can remember in times past having to go buy shoes is thinking of it just as a chore, and I can hardly wait to get it done, get back home and do the other things that I had to do. But I realized these shoes are not just things. They're representative of God's love for me, something that I need. And because God's love loves me, he'll provide whatever is needed. So I took this opportunity very joyously, and my wife and I went to the shoe store. We found some wonderful shoes, and as we were walking away, I just found myself thanking God for his love. Instead of saying, phew, I got that chore behind me, thanking God for his love. And his love extends to all of his children, not just me. So that made the trip to the shoe store much more pleasant, and I went home feeling very refreshed, found myself thanking God. And that was my trip there. So metaphysics does resolve things into thoughts, and that was my experience at that day. So I'm thankful for that time. Mary.
I'll read a few things from our church website bulletin board. The first from Georgia. I am grateful for the January issue of Love is the Liberator. I'm using it every day during my independent watch. It has given me inspiration and more confidence. I feel that my watches are much more effective. It is a wonderful guide, and I am so grateful to all who contributed. And then Pennsylvania. Thanks for your post about finding inspiration during your watches. I have been feeling quite stuck, thinking they must be done a certain way. Clearly they do not, at least not as I have been believing. And then Virginia, many thanks for the Feast of Love in last night's meeting, January 27th. The very wonderful readings and every heartfelt testimony gave us so much to use, take away, and share. And thank you so much for the beautiful music as well. Tonight I'd like to say how grateful I am for our wonderful website, the new version of it, which is reaching out far and wide, and we welcome those, again, who are finding our church for the first time. And also for the carousel, as Bruce mentioned, the wonderful articles that are on every day, quite a selection of handling all types of problems. And I thank Jeremy for posting them and others of you who find those. I know Sharon goes into our archives and finds them and contributes them so we can display them to everyone. And there are others of you too that have found wonderful articles that I'm so grateful for. One that helped me particularly the other day was the one by Bicknell Young, Praying for Those in Authority. Now, right now, of course, with all of this presidential election things going on in our country at this time, there is certainly a need for ongoing prayer about this. And this article brings out that. It speaks of Congress and how the legislative bodies are constantly subject to mental suggestions of all kinds, and it is all nations everywhere. I was reading, too, about our Constitutional Convention held in Philadelphia in May 1787. And at that time, there was quite a bit of arguing and contention, states divided instead of united. And George Washington and Benjamin Franklin were both attending it. And during this disruptive time, I guess they were deadlocked, and some of the New York delegation went home in disgust, and others were preparing to leave. But an elder statesman, which was Benjamin Franklin, he rose to his feet, and he said, and I quote, "At the beginning of the war," he said calmly, "we prayed for divine protection. Our prayers were answered. I have lived a long time. The longer I live, the more I see that God governs in the affairs of man. If a sparrow cannot fall without his notice, can an empire rise without his aid?" Franklin wiped his glasses and continued talking. "The Bible assures us that unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. We can only build our house in America with his help. I therefore move that from now on we begin each session in prayer, asking for assistance and blessing from heaven." It was said that that speech marked the turning point for the convention. And after that, and when this prayer was adopted, the states began to come together, and they wrote our what is known as our Constitution, which is an incredibly God-inspired document. So we know today that there are many in our government that do believe in the power of prayer, and we of course do, and can uphold them and can uphold our nation and every nation with this power of prayer, to know that God is governing and that we will listen to his voice and not be led astray, but to be a nation, one nation under God. I'm so grateful to be learning all of this, to have a nation where we can worship freely, and a nation that founded, Mrs. Eddy was able to discover Christian Science. So grateful to be here tonight to hear those inspired readings, the wonderful testimonies, and our beautiful music.